Will come to order. The city clerk will call the roll.
Aiello, Burmaster, Carcone, Beatrice, Williamson, Classimo Testa, Lemetico, Giruzzi, present.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silence for the deceased members of the County Council. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have a special guest, Greg Evans from the Bonadeo Group, is here to present the audit to the council members. Greg, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is the audit of March 31, 2024. Obviously, we're coming to the end of the next year, so the timing of it isn't perfect. If you choose to engage us going forward, that's one of the things that I would like to change, is to be here obviously much sooner, so that these numbers are a little more relevant. That being said, we'll go over the results of the audit. You have probably a stapled copy in front of you labeled required communication. No? Maybe not?
Oh, it might be at my dad.
Do you have that one?
Which one? No.
We got it.
Is it the letter or the?
You have one that says required audit report.
You want my copy there?
Okay.
No.
That's-
The letter might be on my desk.
Yeah,
Would
that's
that, would that
fine.
come in the first or the second?
All right, that's fine. What page would it be on the regular audit?
It's a separate one, but I'll just go over it real quick. There's just a,
If you don't mind, Melissa, can you make copies of these, please?
Yeah.
So that we have it. Well, you can still.
Actually, I might have them. Let me just see what it is.
Yeah.
Because I didn't throw everything out in the first batch. I
Yeah,
wasn't sure what
it's
was
just-
supposed to be kept.
yeah.
So which one is this? I don't know if I do have that. All right, let me go see if I've got it.
That's okay. So really, this isn't that big of a deal. It's just kind of the scorecard of what happened during the audit. Diana left so I can say bad things about her. No, I'm just kidding. One of the things we talk about here is sort of how the audit went. We really didn't have any difficulties in performing the audit. We had no journal entries. Diana was certainly prompt in responding to our requests. One of the things I will point out is the Harbor Point audit, which is included in your financial statements. That was delayed a little bit in getting some of the information relative to that. That kind of slowed us down a little bit, but we worked through that. But that was really the only issue. In terms of other things, had we had journal entries, they would be attached to this. No journal entries. And what that means is the numbers that you've seen throughout the year are the numbers that appeared in these financial statements. We do some of these presentations where, as an auditor, we come in and we might make 15, 20, 25 journal entries, meaning we're adjusting those entries, and we become part of your internal controls, which is exactly what you don't want. That's what's known as a material weakness. You don't have any material weaknesses, so that's good. And also, those numbers that you're relying on during the year, they're good numbers. Again, if we come in, if it's me or someone else that you hired, that's one of the things you should always ask is, what are the journal entries? What did you change from what we saw during the year? So.
Greg, can I ask you, how many budgets have you worked on, or audits have you worked on for the city of Utica?
This is my first one for the city of Utica,
Okay.
yeah.
I mean, if you noticed throughout the years, we have gone from material weaknesses.
Yeah.
And we've changed that financial position through the audits, which we never knew we were doing.
Right.
Which has also helped us get into the position to understand where some of our finances are.
Right.
And that's why I break your chops about Alan, because
Yeah.
Alan's done all those audits for us throughout the years.
Right.
So if I ask you questions and you're not familiar with them, which I hope you are, and you dealt with the audit.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yep.
So obviously you're familiar with what's going on.
Yep.
So if you don't mind, can you take us from start to finish on what you audited into our general fund?
Yep.
So start with there, and then we'll go down and figure
Can
out
we-
where we are from there.
Can we finish?
Yeah,
going
can,
over
let
this?
him finish what he was
Oh,
going
yeah, no,
over,
that's-
please.
yeah.
And then,
Sure, of course.
no, I know.
So really, the only other things that I'll point out from that letter is, we're required to point out that there's significant estimates in your financial statements, and the two big ones that we always like to look at are what we call other post-employment benefits, or your retiree health, and your pension liability. So when we get to that financial statement, I'll point those out again, but those are really big numbers that are calculated by actuaries, which tend to swing a lot on an annual basis based on those assumptions that they put in. And those are long-term liabilities. So, you know, when we talk about the gen fund, those liabilities don't affect the gen fund. So just required to point that out to you. Okay, so we can delve into the big document now, the financial statements.
Just give page numbers if you
Yeah,
can.
absolutely. We'll start right on page 1, the independent auditors report. This is always kind of important for me to point out. This is what you hired us for, is this report. Everything else sort of belongs to you. You're responsible for the numbers and the internal controls over those numbers. We're responsible for giving an opinion on those numbers. That being said, the opinion that we have issued is an unmodified opinion or clean opinion. This is the highest level of assurance that we can give you. Again, if we had come in and we found a lot of mistakes and Diana or the mayor had decided they didn't agree with us, we might have a different opinion called a modified opinion. Had we come in and the records were in shambles where we couldn't actually perform the audit, we might not give an opinion at all. So those are important to point out, that you do have a clean opinion, exactly what you're looking for. I'm going to skip over the management discussion and analysis. That's on pages 4 through 11. What this is, and you know, the mayor did a good job of describing some of the economic factors on page 11. You should definitely check it out. We don't audit this, though. We look at this and we make sure that it makes sense and there's nothing, you know, sort of stretching the truth or anything in there, and these numbers do tie out to the financial statement.
The only thing before we skip over, can you go
Yep.
to the financial highlights on page 4?
Yep.
And just read over the three bullet points if you can?
Okay. Those 3 bullet points are, the first one is related to net position.
Yep.
And that's one of the statements we'll look at, is the statement of net position in just a second here. So that decreased $5 million throughout the year. So I will point out that the statement of net position includes all of the assets and liabilities of the city. So both long-term and short-term are included here. So when I just talked about that retiree health number and that pension number, they all flow through this statement. This is not how you manage the city. You manage the city in the governmental funds or the general fund on an annual budget. These numbers, again, are long-term, short-term. They take everything together. You know, you have your long-term assets in there. You have capital assets in there of $172 million. The reality is you're not going to convert those assets to cash. You're not going to sell all the buildings and equipment of the city for $172 million.
So can you do me a favor? Can you
Yeah.
explain what the decreased net position actually means towards the city? What does it actually mean in general terms?
So in general terms, that's the change in those long-term assets, long-term liabilities of the city for the year. So, and again, don't put a lot of stock in that. We'll talk about what happened in the gen fund in a second, because that included in that number is a huge number for like depreciation. Depreciation doesn't matter.
Right.
Nobody cares. You don't pay any taxes. So why we have to do that for a government doesn't really make any sense, but we do. So this particular statement, you know, relative to that 5 million, I'm gonna call it for informational purposes. There's information in the footnotes that support that and is good information, again, related to those long-term
Which
liabilities.
goes to our net position of $2.4 million in the actual audit for the general fund, which that's all I just wanted to point out.
Right.
That $5 million is an important number, but the 2.4 is what actually goes against it,
Yes.
and you'll talk about
Yep.
that. But
We'll talk about that in a second. So, actually, if you don't mind, we'll skip those two bullets, because we're gonna
Sure.
we're gonna cover
Absolutely.
those in the other ones.
Okay, just wanted to point them out.
All
So
right.
page 11?
So, yeah, we'll go right over to page 13. So, again, this is that statement of net position, relative to that long-term and assets and liabilities. So, when I'm talking about these things that don't necessarily matter today, your pension liability is $46 million. Your retiree liability is $60 million. So, those are giant numbers, but those are numbers that actuaries have calculated for all of your current employees and your retired employees right now. So that's the lifetime there. That's everything you're gonna pay, over, however long these people are employed or retired. So,
What's the retirement one?
46 million.
46 million.
It's the total deferred outflows of resources.
The pension was 46.
Nope, that's
Oh, I'm
37.
sorry. No, you're right. The retirement one is 60 million, the pension is 46.
Where,
So if you go to pension related, total deferred outflows of resources.
we're in 13, right?
Yep.
Yeah, don't look at deferred. Deferred is a whole nother animal. Go down to liabilities, and you'll see in the current liabilities, you'll see current portion of other post-employment benefits of 4 million. And then you add that to your total other post-employment benefits to get to about 60 million. That's retiree health. And right above that, you'll see that net pension liability of 46 million. So those are really the big numbers. Those deferred numbers, not to confuse things, but when those numbers go up and down, the Government Accounting Standards Board sort of realized that, hey, these really distort some of your annual numbers. So they run through those changes and they amortize it over 5 years. So long story short, that's why I tell you, don't put a lot of stock in this particular financial statement. It's a lot of long-term stuff that, again, you don't really use to manage the city. All right, so that being said, page 14, again, that's where you'll see that change of about $4.3 million. Again, that's the effect of the long-term assets and liabilities changing. So let's go over to page 15. So this is where the real numbers lie. This is your balance statement of your governmental funds. So this is a snapshot in time. As of March 31st, 2024, your assets and liabilities of the city. So the first thing we always do when we look at this, we look at the total assets of the general fund, $44 million. And then we look at total liabilities, $26 million. So with any organization, that's sort of your current position. Do you have enough money to pay your bills as of March 31st, 2024? The answer is obviously yes. So not a bad position there. So continuing down that first column is where we get to fund balance. So this is where things start to get a little more interesting. You have restricted fund balance there, meaning that money is set aside in reserves. And I think a lot of that is related to employee benefit reserves.
Yeah. That goes back to the self-insurance component.
Yeah, yep. So that money's set aside for that. Assigned fund balance is basically money that you've set aside for this year's budget. So the money, the budget that you're operating in right now for the year ending March 31, 2025. So there's two different components of that usually. One of them is encumbrances, and the other one is appropriations for the budget, for the 2025 year. Encumbrances are just things that you've ordered, you haven't received, so that money's been set aside. So going down to the next number there, the unassigned fund balance. So this is 1.5 million, almost 1.6 million. This is really the city's savings account. So there's no, basically nothing attached to this. Generally, when we look at this number, we try to compare that to annual expenditures. We like to see that number be at about 10% to 15%. Right now, this number's at about 1-ish%. So, you know, that fund balance has certainly dipped. And I think at the end of last year, you were closer to 8-ish, 9%. So, certainly a number to keep an eye on.
1% of what?
The total.
Total expenditures.
So, and here's the thing, it's very difficult because we're so late in the game that this is
Right.
the end of '24.
Right.
So what everybody has to remember is that this is the last budget of the previous administration going into that. So even though, excuse me?
In the first 3 months of the new administration.
3 months or 8 months, it doesn't matter. This is the end of the result of it. No matter what position you look at, this is the end of it. So 9 months total is the total amount of what you have to look at because that's what year this is in.
Yeah.
Okay, so 3 months isn't gonna make a difference because the budget was presented to us in February. Even if, no matter what way you look at it, this is it.
No.
Do you? Because I don't think you do. But anyways, go ahead. You spent a lot of money, if you're looking at it. So what was the start of it? You said the numbers, it started at what? Eight to 9%,
Yep.
and then it went down to
Yep.
about 1, okay.
And I think, you know, with that, we can flip right over to page 17. So page 17, this is what happened during that year that ended March 31, 2024. Revenues, expenditures, 107 million in revenue, expenditures of 105 million. So at that point, you're ahead of the game, right? 1.4 million. And then you do interfund transfers. So what you had to do there was about 4.6 million. A lot of that went to debt service. So that was transferred out to debt service. Coming down to the change in fund balance for the year. So this is the total of all those fund balance categories of 1.1 million. And what you had budgeted, I think in your original budget for the year was about a use of about 500,000.
I don't
So
even-
just
what-
about double that.
Was it about 500,000? And that actually, in our budget, was towards the healthcare benefits. If you actually read the actual last number, it wasn't technically labeled as fund balance.
Okay.
It was actually
It was. It
labeled
was a
the health,
reserve. It
the
was a
reserve
reserve,
for the
yeah.
health
Fund balance.
employee,
Yeah.
health employee benefits
Yeah.
of that last budget.
Yep.
So our expenses did not exceed our revenue.
By a lot. You're actually going to $4 million. Now, the only thing there's a couple of things that I want to point out. Number one is, and if you look into our current budget, and obviously you don't know, I don't know if you know what our current budget is, but they budgeted $79 million in their original budget that was supposed to be expended. They ended up expending about $84 million out of
Because
the
of
budget.
4.5 million
Now,
in grants.
with that said, you have about $2.4 million in that net position, okay? That was the net position that the city didn't have through that interfund transfer. Now, the question that I have is, I couldn't figure out, and that's why I emailed you, okay? The original amount budgeted was $2.4 million out of CIT. The other amount was $348,000 out of, which ended up coming in for, it was ARPA funding to supplement that, okay? I couldn't figure out where that $2.1 million came from. What ended up coming about was, we ended up borrowing for $2.1 million at that last meeting in December of 2023. Now, the question that I have was, we were told at the time of borrowing that money was in ARPA funding, okay? Go to find out it wasn't in ARPA funding. That was what we bonded for to supplement that $2.1 million deficit
Paving.
inside the budget.
That was for paving?
Which was considered extra paving at that time. So the only thing that I want to point out is that the city probably would have been in worse shape with their fund balance amount had they not borrowed for that $2.1 million, which we were told was in ARPA funding.
Part of that 1 million, it was to fix the field.
That
They
was-
said there was already $1 million in there for Longo. They were gonna use it for bleachers.
There's
and they
two,
were switching it
there's,
back.
there's two separate bond ordinances
Yeah,
that went
okay,
through,
all right.
okay? There was a one that we did in July,
Hey, guys,
which
can
I
we
supported.
finish the presentation first and
can
then
I-
do the questions
Guys,
at the end?
Greg's gonna continue with his audit.
understand
And then
that.
we're gonna go around with your council
Sure,
members,
but
write
th-
your
we're
questions
talking
down.
about, we're
You guys
talking
are-
about
you know,
this, and I just want
I
to,
know,
for
but everybody's
clarification
interrupting.
purposes,
It's
Rocco.
not fair to him.
It is fair, because you still have to explain that $2.4 million. Where did it come from?
We can
It
have-
came from borrowing that they lied about, and that's the most important part, Rock, because you would have been extra $2.1 million out of your fund balance had that not happened. And I think that that's important, that you got to understand where that extra money came from. So not only were you $1.1 million deficit that you had to take out of your fund balance, if you didn't borrow that money in December of 2023, you would have been an extra $2.1 million out of your fund balance that they lied about. So that is important. And Greg, I apologize, but that needs to be recognized of how we got that $2.4 million difference. So yes, I'm sorry, Rocco, but it is important. Go ahead, Greg, I apologize.
Okay. So really another thing I want to point out on the bottom of page 17, under capital projects, you'll see that $30 million, what looks like a deficit there. What that is related to is bond anticipation notes payable, which is a short-term note. When that's converted into long-term financing for those capital projects, that 30 million will go away. You will have revenue of approximately that amount, which will wipe out that deficit for the capital projects fund. So I always like to point that out, sort of, again, another one of those accounting type things that.
Which $30 million has hit our current budget going into a bond, because that has brought up our debt
Right.
service payment from $4 million up to $8 million.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So relative to that, there are footnotes in the back, with all that debt service and all those long-term liabilities. That footnote is footnote 10. You'll see all those maturities. Helpful for budgeting, certainly. Helpful to sort of keep an eye on the increases, like during this year, increase of serial bonds of about 15 million. Again, for that year ending March 31, 2024. Also in those footnotes, we do have additional information related to those retirement plans, and also that retiree health.
What page are we on again?
That,
Oh, okay, 17.
that's just in the footnotes, that's
Okay,
footnote
all
10.
right, just wanted.
I will point out over on page 19, these are your proprietary type funds. So this is where you're gonna see the sewer fund and also that Harbor Point entity that I talked about. And over on page 20, you'll see that, the sewer fund did well for the year, increase of about $1.2 million. So no real issues to be concerned with there. Harbor Point, obviously, separate entity. We just ended up issuing those financial statements actually today. By the time we figured out all the relevant information.
Which that also goes against the city, though, because we're responsible for the Harbor Point Development Committee.
So Harbor Point is presented here as a
Right.
blended component unit.
Right,
And
right.
blended component unit means it's part of the city. It would be misleading to not include that in the city's financial
100%,
statement,
because we're
so.
still responsible for them, even with the deficit that they have.
Right.
And it just really quick with the Harbor Point.
Yep.
So Harbor Point ended up going, was that $510,000 is a negative component to the final number for the harbor?
Yeah.
On page 20.
Yep.
Okay.
And what that was they sold the property for roughly $500,000, but when you allocate the cost of that property that you've put into it, you ended up with a loss.
With a loss, right.
So,
Which that's huge,
right.
especially for that component. And that goes into our current year of what we had to deal with that, understandably.
And I think there was additional sales in the current year, right?
There was,
Okay.
well, to try and make up for that deficit.
Okay. So that's sort of the big picture of what I did. Page 57 does have that statement of budget versus actual. Obviously, that's an unaudited schedule too. I think we've received most of that information from Diana, but you'll see at the bottom of that, the actual of $1.1 million versus those budgeted amounts in both your original and final budget.
So one of the last things that you said in one of your statements was revenues were under budget by 8.6 million and expenditures were under budget by 6.8. And that was due to revenue and related expenditures related to federal stimulus funding received and expended during that 23-24 fiscal year. So what in the calculations, that technically was that $1.8 million deficit that the city would have been in, considering at the end of the day that $1.8 million was there. Had we not borrowed for that 2.1 million to cover that loss, again, in addition to that 1.1 million that we took out of fund balance, you could have seen a greater deficit
Right.
in that transition.
But that's not what happened.
At most, Katie,
If we cannot
please,
finish the presentation,
it is
I can go
literally
home.
1,010% what actually happened. That you can't argue these numbers. This
Right.
is actually it.
This is
1.8 million. Okay?
Finish
You
the
ended up
presentation.
going $2.4 million, which you didn't have in your original fund. And let's actually go to page 57.
No. A point
So
of
your
order.
interfund transfers in was
Mr. President,
two million
we really need to finish this
$94,877. That was what was originally budgeted through the CIT account, correct? That was the number that you gave me, Diana. So that's what we
That's
originally
what was
budgeted for,
budgeted, yes.
okay? You ended up proceeds from issuance of leases. We can take that $12,000 and wash it away at
Can
this
we-
point in
Mr.
time.
point of
So your
order.
interfund
Council,
Yeah,
I know,
she-
but
she
can we
has-
just wait till?
I got the floor.
But wait till.
Your
the end.
interfund transfers
Oh my
out
God.
were $4 million, okay? So if you go back to that 2 million, what was originally budgeted, and you take out that $4 million, which was that interfund transfer, okay? Which we knew out of CIT was coming, that $2 million, because that was in our actual budget. The end of that negative position was $2.4 million. So you've got to understand that. That's at the end of 2024 of our financial position, okay? That doesn't include the amount of money that we took out of fund balance. So if you go under that number, $2.4 million was negative what we had against our budget. The extra $1.1 million was in addition to what we had negative out of our budget. You take those two numbers, you're almost looking at $3.5 million negative if we didn't borrow that 2.1 out of our budget. That is a lot of money to be negative with. I mean, and that's what you have to understand. I feel like I'm a bad person too because I didn't vote for the additional paving fund, right? So even though I didn't vote for it, if I didn't vote for it, you would have seen $3.5 million out of your fund balance. Would you not?
You agree with her?
Actually, 7 million.
No. Because that's not in addition to what we already took out of CIT. You're talking $7 million from 23 to 24. I just want to clarify that point, and that's all. And Greg, I apologize. It might sound political. It might sound political to you, and it really is. But at that same time, to be $3.5 million in a deficit position, and when you're ringing the alarm and no one's listening, that's a serious problem.
You know, I think another thing to point out too is, you know, through the end of this year, this is sort of my last point, and then I'll open it up to any questions. You had spent about $48 million in ARPA funds through 3/31/24.
What was that, 48 million?
48, yep. And then, so presumably, that would leave about 12 million to be spent either this year or through 2026.
Yep.
Those obligations needed to be in place at the end of this fiscal year.
Right.
Or not, the calendar year, sorry, 12/31/24. And again, with those projects wrapping up by 26. So, you know, most of our local governments saw, you know, pretty big infusion of cash from that ARPA money. So, you know, I always tell people to try to go back before then and make sure that you're balancing those budgets.
Which is huge, because you
You
think
know.
that that's free money just to waste away in your actual budget. And that's really what happened at the end of this year, is that they thought that there was more money in that ARPA funding to cover that, and there wasn't.
Okay.
You
To
know,
cover
so
what?
that's really additionally what it comes down to. So one last thing. So that $1.1 million, okay? And the other thing that I wanna point out is if you go to on page 57, if you go to our original budget and our final budget, that's an important number from revenue and other sources over expenditures, encumbrances, and other uses. That total expended amount was $6 million of our original budgeted amount, correct?
I'm not sure what you mean by
So
that.
if
You're looking at the final budget?
if our final budget, that's $6 million, 6.8.
Yeah, so that's the final budget would be showing using $6.8 million of
Over
fund balance.
of what it
Right.
expended.
So
Okay.
where you actually landed though with all of it was that 1.1 million.
Which luckily we borrowed throughout the year.
Right.
Otherwise you would have been worse.
Okay.
Councilmember
Are you
Ayala?
done with your presentation?
Yes, yeah, those were just the high points, and certainly I can answer any
So
questions.
what we'll do, Greg, is I'll start with Councilmember Ayala. Please do not interrupt her. Let her speak, and then we'll go around.
I only have two questions. Things like when I'm looking at our deficit, but I look at our revenue lines, there were certain lines, like we had set aside $250,000 of ARPA to pay for police officers. We never charged that account. We had the money, but it just seems like had we spent that, it would have been a lower deficit than this is. Do you guys look into those accounts and pick and choose, like, okay, if grants aren't charged, what are you guys doing with that?
Yeah, I mean, we look at it in total mostly, so when we look at that budget to actual, you know, we're looking to see those big variances. So if that, you know, in your example, if that variance had come up, we would have asked the question, all right, is this really what you were intending to do? And maybe, you know, proposed an entry at that point. But again, I'm not 100% familiar with what happened with that.
No worries. And then with this one, we were kind of told that, I'm asking, when did this when was this audit completed?
So we actually issued the audit on December 30th. So we did the bulk of the work probably in the, you know, month to 2 months prior to that.
Okay, so this one that we're looking at, all the numbers are
Yeah.
from December 30. Thank you, that is all.
I'm good, that was my question, when was the audit finished? You just answered.
Yeah, so your federal deadline is December 31st. So we came in just under the wire there. Yeah, it was, and again, this is not ideal timing. We need to work on that.
When are we supposed to start, when should we be reaching out to you, typically?
I mean, I would say we need to get this thing started more like September.
And when did we start it this year?
That's
Uh,
because you
third
didn't
week in
finish
October.
23.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
thank
didn't
you.
finish 23 until when?
That was December 30th.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
didn't even
That's-
do 23's audit,
That's why
and we
we-
didn't
we
get that
asked
to the
that they
current
come in a
fiscal
little
year of
earlier,
24.
but it's still-
You had to finish 23 before you got to 24.
Right.
Joe, do you have a question?
Nothing. Councilman Carcone? Councilman Urban?
I don't have anything, I was just gonna ask, and he just answer my question, because we do have a budget coming up. That's probably already started. When did you get informed to do this budget, to review this?
What do you mean?
I mean, is it normal for us to get a budget that's ended March of '24 at a late date like this?
Oh,
Or
the
is that
audit?
normal?
Yeah, no.
The audit, yeah.
Yeah, the audit should definitely be done sooner. I mean, the federal deadline is 9 months after year end.
Right.
But again, you know, as legislators in charge of governance, it's better to have those numbers as soon as possible, right? So we gotta somehow get that timeline moved up.
Okay. I was just wondering why we got it so late, and you just answered that question, so.
Yeah, I have two questions. One for Amir, and then one for, I just want you to clarify something.
Okay.
Amir, there's.
Elmer.
Elmer, there is constant talk that there's ARPA money left, and we did not, just confirm to me that by December 31st of 2024, all our ARPA money has been allocated. We did not lose any ARPA money, correct?
Yes, we had a common council meeting.
Right.
About ARPA, and in that meeting, we discussed all the contracts that are
Right.
in place for the.
It has to be allocated, not spent, so that's
Right.
correct and it's done.
Contracts to be allocated.
Okay, so there is not thousands of dollars from ARPA left, and we didn't spend.
No.
Thank you. My last question to you is, please confirm to me, if you could, because I think she did a great job, and I gotta, quite frankly, a lot of this stuff I really don't understand. What Councilperson Colosimo Testa is speaking about borrowing this money in January and where the deficit would have been,
December.
or in December of '23, is she correct in saying that? Where the deficit would have been a lot bigger if we didn't borrow that money?
I think the expenditures would be the same. I'm trying to think of how that would flow through there.
Well, I think what the council person is saying is that we were over in paving. General fund was covering that money.
Oh,
So
okay.
we had to we had to
Borrow.
borrow for the paving, which
So it would have
flowed back
settled.
in. So if we did not
Borrow,
borrow,
we
that
would
money
have been
to
back.
cover,
Okay.
to,
Right.
yeah,
So
reimburse.
she is
basically.
correct in what she's saying. Thank you. No further questions.
Councilmember?
Yes, sir. I have one question. So we went from an 8 to 9% fund balance down to a 1% fund balance. So what I'm gathering is the last administration set up this administration for basically failure with the tax increase and everything else. And you're the numbers guy, and what I'm looking at and what I'm hearing all night, is that what I'm hearing, that the last administration actually set up this administration for failure?
I don't want to.
No, what
I
I'm
don't
getting
wanna
at,
say it like
because
that.
you gotta understand something, no.
Al would say yes, no, I'm just.
No,
kidding.
because what I'm getting at, because, the previous administration was 0, 0, 0, 0, 0.
For the fiscal
And all of a
special.
sudden, you're not supposed to interrupt, okay?
I'm
All right?
Thank you.
All right? Yeah, you want to talk? Okay. Anyways, that's what I'm asking. Because he had to come in at this next administration, when he came in, he had to raise taxes. So what I'm getting at is that this last administration, and we pay a lot of money for this. I know it sounds political, but it's really not, because at the end of the day, he's got to raise taxes, nobody's pounding him on the head.
Right.
But the last administration actually, basically set him up for failure, what I'm hearing tonight.
Yeah, so,
I know stuff.
no, I understand. So the reality is though, so again, going to that unassigned fund balance number. So when you're looking at, anything less than 10%, it's kind of like, you don't have anything in your savings account, and you're driving around and you get in a car accident and you got to pay the deductible, right?
Yes.
You're putting yourself in a bad position. So and I don't know all of the dynamics that went into how we got to this point, but I do know that having 1% in the unassigned fund balance is not where you want to be. It leaves you very little flexibility.
And like you said, we gotta start this in September,
Right.
not December 30th, the day before he walks out the door.
Right.
Okay.
So, here's one thing that I will say,
I'm done.
is that the Bonadillo firm completed the 23 audit, the 22-23 audit for the city of Utica.
Right.
Would you be able to start the 24 audit without completing the 23 audit?
No.
Okay.
No.
So that's the reason, because we didn't get that 23 audit in that 24 fiscal year, we actually got it in the 24 fiscal year. I think it was,
I think
they,
it
I
went
can't remember
into
the exact
January
date.
or-
Yeah, it was
And to be honest, yeah, which it was. In all our audits that we've been presented have usually been in February. So although this is a little behind, because you wouldn't get that 25 fiscal year until the following year, because you have to complete your books, this audit is actually considerably on time, so to speak, if you would say. So, with that said, Councilperson Aiello brought up that there was 250K that was supposed to be allocated for the police department. That was not in the 24 fiscal year, of the 23-24 fiscal year.
You said
of what she was
2023,
saying.
2024.
So what she's talking
Yeah.
about is actually this current fiscal year of
Okay.
the accounts that she's talking about. So it had nothing to do with this actual audit.
No, Diana, it was from the previous year. We don't have 250,000 of ARPA set aside for this year. It's 431,000 for this year. So there are two accounts.
So what you're saying is that Paul Mary didn't spend that money out of his account? I highly doubt that.
Point of order.
Yeah, I agree. Let me finish.
Mr. President, you said no interruptions.
Please.
Thank you. Okay, so just for clarification purposes. However, moving forward, and I'm not sure who's gonna do the audit for this current fiscal year, but I just wanna go through a couple numbers, and it took me some time to figure out a lot of this. It's very tough to read audits, it's very tough to go through budgets. I don't have an accounting firm, accounting degree, I have a teaching degree, I teach fifth graders, okay? Which might be harder than audits at some time.
I would agree.
So if you look at, I just want to go through some numbers. So if you look at the 24-25 budget estimate, we had $4.2 million, and I'll give or take a few, through our taxes being raised to cover some of the deficits that we had in this current fiscal year. $1.3 million was taken from the fund balance in 2024. 1.3 was taken out in 2023. 1.1 was taken out in 2022. You have a fund balance draw of $2.4 million in those last two fiscal years, which is a huge impact of not having that cash flow going in. In order for us to make up the revenue for the current budget, we had to, that's where the tax increase came from. Now, the one thing I want to point out, which is kind of important, is and it just doesn't have to do with paving, it doesn't have to do with that, it actually has to do with our cash flow purposes, because right now we have a revenue anticipation note for $5 million, which is huge. It's the first time we've had a revenue anticipation
We
note.
haven't taken it out yet, though, I'm hoping.
No, but what I'm
But
saying,
it's on the
Diana,
table just in case.
the last time
Yes.
that we took out a revenue anticipation note
years.
has
Yeah.
been years,
It's been
okay?
years. She's
So
right.
to get us to this financial position is very upsetting to me.
Yeah, me too.
That's the $5 million that we're talking about. Jack, I
We
think
might
that you
have to
might, you
borrow.
were probably the first year you were on the
We
council.
might have to borrow until we
That
get
was,
our AIM
this is the
funding.
first time in a very long time
Yeah, she's
that
right.
we've actually even had to have this discussion, which is very upsetting to me. Now, if you go back and you look at our budget from 23, 24, 25, and now we're going into 26. What you have to look at is that even though our expenditures were there, our revenue has not met our expenditures, okay? Our budget doesn't go back down, right? We went from 79 million to 87 million. I think from last year's budget to what the mayor just proposed was up probably about $500,000, if you look at the difference between those 2 years. So even though your budget went from 79 million to 87 million, those revenues did not go with it, but by a lot. And that's upsetting to me. The only thing that I want to say is that the difference between the 23 all the way up into 24 was there was a $7 million difference in our budget and what's been expended compared to revenues. With that said, even with the $4.2 million of revenue estimated from taxes being raised, you're left with a $3.6 million deficit because your revenues become stagnant, okay? We've now had to take out of our fund balance once again, out of our budget, which is huge, because you really don't want to take out a fund balance. And the reason why I wanted to bring up the interfund transfer component, that's very important to me. What I budgeted for was that $2.1 million was supposed to come out of that account. What ended up happening, because we borrowed, was that deficit that was covered up between that 2.4. Now, the last thing that I want to state is that the most important component to me is what you talked about of that $30 million net position of what the city expended through, whether it's through federal funds or whatever. We have to roll those bands into bonds. And that is why you see such a huge gap between what we've expended to debt service to what we're paying now. And this goes back to Almir. What was the difference in the budget that you just proposed today compared to what our debt service payment was last year? Roughly.
It went down a tiny bit. Long-term debt went down a tiny, right?
The long-term debt went down,
Like
I believe-
$100K maybe?
The
Wasn't
debt
it?
service, we were at 5.2 million, the past one,
was it?
this one.
This,
I think
the
overall it
loan.
was $100,000. $200,000.
Long-term.
Long
But
term.
not short-term.
But our actual payment through that interest and that band payment has gone up 3 million. Correct?
Yeah, that sounds, yeah, probably.
Okay, that's my point.
Yeah,
Even,
it was
even
about
though
3
we
million this
borrowed,
year, yeah.
you end up having to pay back the money.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that comes back to my point. You know what I mean? Like, that service schedule is very important, not only to our budget, that's actually more important than our revenues and our general fund in general, is that payment has to come at some point in time.
Yeah.
Now, we could defer payments, but you still have to pay that money back.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
And this is the problem that I have, and it's very upsetting, knowing back in 2012, with the positions that were cut, the people that lost their jobs, the people that were demoted, the people that had to suffer to get us to this point, to be back in that position, no matter how much money we have in our fund balance, we have to borrow from Peter to pay Paul. Hopefully we don't. That's a huge problem to me, Diana. And I know you were here through it all, and we had a very long, positive outlook for the city. And I knew it was coming to a fall in that 23-24 year from the amount of money that we spent.
Unfortunately, taxes should have been, my
Even if
opinion,
you do, even if you
should
did the
have been
2%,
raised
we shouldn't have lowered
2% every year
it, even if
because
we
it's
did the 2% every year.
cumulative. Anyway, we digress, I'm sorry.
Correct. And I get,
We had the budget director from the previous year quit like 4 months before.
it was way more than 4.
4 or 5 months.
Yeah.
We didn't have
About
a
6
budget
months.
director coming in, and he stepped into it.
He stepped into a mess. I feel bad for him. That's it, Mr. Dritzy. Thank you.
You're welcome. Councilmember Medical?
Well, from what I could review, this looks like a fair and equitable review of the previous year, and I appreciate you coming.
And if I can just reply to my,
Councilman?
but just looking at, so the expenses did not exceed the revenue. That meant we were, that part, there seems to be a confusion on that, but
Bud, let her speak, please.
maybe it did. But from what I was looking at, it was 107 million to 105. And then, but I can also, do you want to chime in with that?
I think when we're looking at page 17 in the
The
general
top
fund,
half, yeah.
So, yeah, so the revenues were 107 million, the expenditures, the budgeted, basically the appropriations were 105. But then when you factor in
The rest,
the transfer out,
yes.
that's where your fund balance took.
But our
took
day-to-day
the hit.
operations and those, okay.
Right.
But I wanted to go back to, so it's very true that there was $250,000 of ARPA this administration had the chance to use to pay for the police the police salaries we did not use. And the reason I was asking about the grants, I'm not expecting you to read every little thing on this screen, but we have about 23 grants from the 2023 to 2024 that totaled 2.4 million. We only used, and this is not counting the SAFER grant, guys, we only used $1 million of those grants. Some may exceed and go into other years, but there are some here that I think we were not utilizing, and I didn't know if what you guys dig into and do. I don't think you do individual audits on grants, but that's what I was asking.
They weren't, it's not they weren't utilized, they're multi-year grants, so I
Some
mean,
are,
and
but
the
some of these
expenses
weren't.
and the revenues are going to equal.
But then, so the
So
$250,000.
there's no, oh my God, we got all this money
But
and
the
we didn't spend it.
$250,000 of ARPA, we need to be serious. That was
I
chosen
don't
to
know,
not be.
I'm not sure what you're even referring to. Honestly, I have to look. I mean, there's just, too much in my
Okay.
head right now.
I believe you with that,
money
but,
was budgeted for in previous years, and it was never transferred into the budget. There was nothing stating what that money was for. And we
Well,
all sat around this table.
there's an ordinance
doing
stating
an
what that money's
ARPA,
for.
Meeting, and every single
sorry, Greg, it's less of a you
penny
question.
had a contract attached to it.
And
we don't have anything like
we hired 5 police officers to be paid for by ARPA for those 3 years.
That
And
was
this,
under the gun violence.
well, it was also with ARPA was going to secure
That
this
was-
funding.
that is ARPA, gun
So that
violence.
$250,000 of ARPA was in the budget. So just like this year, we have $431,000 allocated for ARPA. I think we should look at it because now I'm wondering if we do have that left. But yeah, there was confusion on that, and you guys are saying that that's for this current year, and it's not. I was talking about this past year of grants, and I think stuff was, I think we could have claimed more revenue than we did. So that's all I have. Thank you.
You thought that about the marijuana too.
And I'm right about the marijuana too.
Wrong.
No, I'm
Hang on.
You're wrong.
I'm
Joe?
so right.
Councilmember Williamson?
Show you the
So
numbers.
going back with Deputy Comptroller, she said that we should have grown the budget over the last few years. Instead, we've been taking zeros for
Oh, yeah.
the administration. And now we got this big deficit going down. Our fund balance is down $7-8 million. We're down to what was it, sir, again?
Let's see, about 1.6 million.
1.6 million, our fund balance, down from 9 million. You know, and this is where we're sitting at, you know, it just keeps on going on. So I think, and you're the, you know, we hire you to look at all the numbers, that this administration that's in now got set up from the last administration. That's why he's got to raise taxes so high, because of the situation we're in now. Am I correct?
Again, you know, the
That's
fund
not his
balance
call,
is.
Mark. He
Yeah, I mean,
can't
I don't know the entire history of, you know, the tax levy, and, I mean, there's two pieces of that, right? There's the expenditure side and the revenue side. So, again, I don't know the expenditure side of the past, but I know where you're at as of March 31, 2024,
Okay.
which is low fund balance.
Okay.
We spent a lot of money that we
Yeah.
didn't have.
And again, that federal money is, we're coming to the end of that federal money, so that sort of safety blanket that you've had over the past couple of years is now gone.
Thank you, sir.
Elmir, thank you. I think you explained yourself very well. Diana, thank you. You've
Greg, are
explained
you
yourself very well.
Are you done?
Greg?
Okay,
so
thank
much.
you,
Greg,
Greg.
I just want to say thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Second. Greg, thank you.
Thank you.
Diana.
Diana, thanks.